Hey everyone, I'm Michael Douglas. Welcome back to another episode of Dr. Pundit, where we talk about music, not medicine. And this is another tale of on this day in music history. April 5th, this time, April 5th, 1988. 37 years ago. And what happened on April 5th, 1988? Well, to very little fanfare, Tracy Chapman released her debut album, and I think kind of changed the way we approach the notion of listening to folk music. You know, this self-titled album by Tracy Chapman yielded a few major career hits, Talking About a Revolution, Baby Can I Hold You. Those were the follow-ups to her biggest hit at the time, Fast Car, a track that hit number 6 on the Billboard Hot 100. Now, a few years later in the 1990s, she had released Give Me One Reason, a song that went up to number 3. But we're talking about her self-titled debut. The record was a very substantial commercial and artistic hit. The album hit number 1 on the Billboard 200, but more than charting success and critical acclaim, the album, I think, changed the world of contemporary folk in a really big way. Now, this record came out when I was a sophomore in college going into my junior year, and, I had heard of folk music. I was born in 1968, so it was kind of like, whoosh. I knew this happened a lot in the beatnik era in the years before I was born, and we hear some of the old baby boomers, including my parents, talk about things like Peter, Paul, and Mary and the Kingston Trio, and that was my idea of folk music. But it took this album to kind of get into that contemporaneous mood that I think really struck a chord with top 40 music listeners, hence the success of the top 10 hit Fast Car. Now, putting this record together was not an easy feat. A number of producers had turned Chapman down before this guy, David Kirschenbaum, decided to give the acoustic album a chance. It was recorded in Hollywood in about 8 weeks, 2 months. Chapman was originally discovered in 1987 by fellow Tufts University student Brian Koppelman. He first heard her perform after a friend told him to check out a protest singer who would benefit an upcoming apartheid protest at the university. Back then, divestment from South African interests and South African politics in the wake of Nelson Mandela's imprisonment was a big impetus for a lot of protests in the late 1980s. When he first saw Tracy Chapman strumming her guitar and singing at a coffee shop, he was immediately taken back by her sincerity. And with a few connections in place, Chapman secured a deal with Elektra Records, and her debut album was underway. Now, folk music had seen many evolutions through the 20th century. The 1980s was not exactly considered a pinnacle era, as I had alluded to earlier. That had been lost in the 1960s and 1970s. Folk music was in a bit of a rut, even. And maybe that's even a stretch to say that. It seems that all the genre really needed was a sincere musician to reintroduce casual music listeners back into that fold. Tracy Chapman was that sincere musician, in my opinion. Her debut record resonated with the public in a very big way, and in a world full of hair metal, new jack swing, listeners were smitten with a powerful energy that Chapman brought to contemporary folk music with just her voice and her guitar. A lot of music critics credit this as being a very major album in the late 1980s that did shift, albeit a little bit, public consciousness of folk music being, hey, this is a great genre that sounds great today. The juxtaposition of contemporary themes and classic production values precisely is what makes this album really distinctive, and it has definitely stood the test of time, even eclipsing, I think, all albums she released after that, because this is who Tracy Chapman was. It was an unvarnished introduction into who this person was at the time as an artist. No BS, just straight out who she was, what her talents are, to this present day. And I think that's very refreshing. It basically brought the traditions of folk music to the present day. 1988, okay, at that time, but even now, almost 40 years later, 2025. Chapman changed the way the public listened to folk music, and she helped launch an entirely new movement of protest music in the Bush era. think groups like, say, the Indigo Girls, who basically came out in the latter part of 88, early 89. The themes were modern, but the production was not unlike what you'd hear from Bob Dylan or Joan Baez even. Tracy Chapman was carrying that torch into the 1980s, and I think she succeeded at basically saying, hey, this is a genre that will continue to entertain and inspire audiences to listen year in and year out. And I don't think it's hyperbole to say that her self-titled debut went a long way into making that happen. I'm Michael Douglas, and if you like what you see here on Dr. Pundit, please don't hesitate to like and subscribe. And as the late great Barry White always used to say, let the music play, and I'll see you on the next episode.